probably more oppose it, because I think many of them mistakenly see it as a tax increase, and it's not, because the municipalities and counties that benefit, they absolutely can use that income to reduce their rates. That no one says they have to spend it. I mean, that's what, and the Republicans who support it agree with us, that's what they say. So if the county and city get more money from this, there's no saying they don't have to use it to make their government bigger. They can use it to decrease the taxes on everybody else, right? And so it's kind of agnostic about the size of government. But because some misconstrue it as a tax increase, that's probably the reason we haven't been able to pass it yet, quite frankly. I do think, again, there's been bipartisan support, but we've had a challenge convincing some of our Republican colleagues that it's not really a tax increase, and that's where it's kind of stuck right now.
We have time.
I think there were two people who wanted to speak again. Let's just go to both of our people that had already spoken, and I think there's one more gentleman that has it. So we'll do these last three, and then I'll reply to these. Great questions. So future of education, I share a lot of your concerns about our current Secretary of Education, who seems more concerned with attacking public schools rather than supporting public schools, and regardless of what people think of the other kinds of schools we have, and certainly, independent schools are fine. The vast majority of kids go to our public schools, so we should be focused on improving our public schools. We're worried about some of the budget cuts that are proposed in that area. They're proposing, for instance, zeroing out the Title II teacher training money, which, since teacher training needs to occur, basically districts will have to take money out of other things and put it into that. We've got to invest in education. We have to make sure that we have, we invest in, of course, training and making sure our educators are supported and can earn a living. And a lot of that is very difficult right now, and I don't think there's going to be much help from Washington, so it's going to be up to school districts. Frankly, some have it even harder than Poudre. Thompson had their mill levy on the ballot, and it failed for teacher salaries, and that's because they're right in between Poudre and St. Vrain, and their starting teacher salary is more than 10% less. So you can imagine, people who want to enter teaching, Poudre and St. Vrain on one side or the other, how are you going to go into Loveland? They were trying to address that with their mill levy, but it didn't pass. So it's tough, but a lot of it's local. Rush to drill. I mean, I think your point is right that it's in the ground. Whether you take it out now or in 10 years is, in the scheme of things, not important. We're always going to be, not always, but we're going to be using fossil fuels for the foreseeable future. And I think, a more, measured strategic approach, makes sense. So again, locally, here in our state, I support empowering communities to have a seat at the table, a more orderly way of doing that. Obviously, the operators are out to make a buck, and that's the incentive, and we respect that, but then the counterbalance has got to be how does the whole planning go for it? People are entitled to make a buck, but it shouldn't just be anywhere, anytime. It should be a little bit more order to that process, and I do support that. Let's see, Kathy asked about balancing the budget. I've concluded that I don't think Congress will balance the budget unless they have to, so I support a balanced budget amendment that would require Congress to balance the budget. At this point, it's not the ideal policy. It would be better if Congress actually balanced it. By the way, I think the last time it was balanced was in the mid-90s, I think 95, 96. Right. Yeah. Last time it was balanced, last time there was a surplus. So there's probably at least a couple people in this room that weren't even born then, if we have any younger people, but it's been a long time. And I don't think they'll do it unless it's required. It's required in Colorado. They have a balanced budget every year. Our amendment does spell out if there's a national emergency, it doesn't have to be budget balanced that year, but it should be balanced over time, and I think it'll take a requirement to do it, is my conclusion, just given, or obviously people could elect a very different Congress that actually wanted to do that. But I've routinely voted for trying to bring it into balance. I supported a bipartisan group a few years ago called Simpson Bowles that some of you might remember Senator Simpson from Wyoming. He was the chair, and then he was a Republican, there's a Democrat. They came out with a real good plan for it, balancing it, not immediately, it was over 10 years, reasonable. We actually had a vote on that budget on the floor. The good news is, of all the budgets that we voted on, it was the only budget that got Democratic and Republican votes, but the bad news is it failed overwhelmingly. Most Republicans, and they were in the majority, voted for their budget and passed it, and most Democrats voted for their budget, which obviously didn't pass, they were in the minority. But this bipartisan budget got like 35 votes out of 435 people. So I think a requirement would be the best way to do it. You talked about working together and the seating. In the House, it's open seating, meaning we kind of go wherever we want. It's true that generally Democrats congregate on one side, Republicans congregate on the other. Right. Not exclusively, we all wander around, but you sort of know where to find people. Even beyond that, there's just certain certain people hang out in certain areas. Most of the time we're on the floor. I have like a list of 4 or 5 members I'm looking for. I need to get this person on this bill or this person on this bill. I think another problem is, if you talk about who you're kind of seeing representing the Democrats and Republicans on TV and cable, it tends to be the biggest bomb throwers on both sides because they make for the most exciting TV. So when you see, the Democrat and Republican screaming and yelling on a cable program, that's not very representative of most Democrats and Republicans, but they are the most interesting to watch, right? It's not as interesting when you have a Democrat saying, well, I'm looking to work in a bipartisan way to do this, and a Republican saying, I'm looking for a bipartisan way to figure out how to make healthcare less affordable, more affordable, so it's tough. That's, some of their policies do that, so I guess I slept, but but I agree. I mean, we did actually have a deliberate effort during a couple State of the Unions ago to sit with people of the opposite party. We did that. I did it during President Obama's last State of the Union. I sat on what is generally the Republican side. Again, it's not exclusively the Republican side. There's probably 10 or 15 Democrats, but I was over there, so I was standing up and applauding, and not a lot of other people were. And I'll probably try to do it. For President Trump's first one, I sat kind of right in the middle. Also, it's first available seating, so you kind of have to take whatever seat you got. But no, it's a good point. I mean, visually, symbolically, we shouldn't have that, seat where you have to sit. So I'll continue to try to break that up a little bit. Let's see. Oh yeah, what about sort of preventing, making sure we have a higher standard for future presidents? I think there's ample opportunity to do that. We have, again, bipartisan support, looking at things like what is the review process to make sure there's not a conflict of interest of the president, disclosing the assets, divesting, all of these things which, frankly, Congress is under a lot of these things. So we have like an independent ethics commission. We have a very detailed asset analysis. Like somebody asked if I had a pharmaceutical stock. That's all. The president doesn't have that. Members of Congress do. People hadn't really thought about it before this president, I guess. So hopefully, if we have bipartisan support to put them in place, a lot of the Republicans, the way that they're able to sidestep the Trump issue, who still is very popular on their side, is they say this will go in for the next president, not Trump, which is still good policy. I mean, we're saying we're going to put it in the future after this president, which we need. So if there's a way to get some of those things in, I think there is, around conflict of interest, around disclosure, that might at least leave a positive legacy for this. So that's very much underway. I'm the sponsor of several bills to do that, and they do have bipartisan support as well. And I think there's a reasonable path to do them. Keep calling your representative and Congress people. Let's see. We asked about. You also asked about U.S. Postal Service, but yeah, I mean the issue she alluded to, they have to prepay their pension at a much higher rate than any other business, and that siphons money out of their operational side. And it's not so much about expanding service, frankly, it's about maintaining the service they have. So they're talking about unless they can get that fixed, they might have to cut down their service days each week or close additional rural post offices, which has a huge effect on communities. So we're continuing to try to work with them on that. Lastly, you asked about coal and renewable energy. So federally, I'm a sponsor of a bill for us to move to renewable energy 100% by 2050. In the state, I think Colorado can do it sooner, just because we have great solar and wind resources. It is a question of when you close down the last coal plant, and I think the date is debatable. I mean, I think it's going to happen. I think it's inevitable. I think that's where we're moving, both because these are expendable resources, like the gentleman mentioned. We're going to run out at some point, but even before we run out, it's just economics. Already today, you talk to Excel, it's 10% less expensive to add new wind capacity, and that's why they're not building new coal plants, because it's less expensive energy to add new wind. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to retire every coal plant tomorrow. You're not, because there's a lot of energy there. It still provides baseload. But, I think that that's reasonable. It could be 2040, it could be 2050. It'll probably be in that time frame when we retire the last coal plant. I mean, some are being, again, shuttered today because of costs, like the Valmont Butte plant in Boulder County is shuttered this year, just because Excel said it's more expensive to produce coal energy here, and we're getting less expensive energy through wind. Did you have a quick follow-up?
Well, was that also in lieu of it was more expensive to convert that plant rather than just continue to leave it run with coal?
Convert it to natural gas or to what? They're not doing that with that particular plant either. I mean, you'd have to have Excel in here to talk about their plans.
Correct.
But, yeah.
Right, because we used to deliver coal to that plant is why I'm
Yeah.
I was under the impression that plant closed specifically because the mandate for state within that city limit that had to be natural gas by a certain date, that's why it closed, because they weren't gonna upgrade.
I'd have to, I don't think they're running natural gas in that plant. They're just closing it down. Again, Excel they're not building any new coal plants. They expanded the one down in Pueblo a few years ago, but they didn't build a new one. They expanded its capacity. But they are aggressively building new wind, which also uses rail when you're moving turbines. But yeah, I mean, look, it's not going to go away tomorrow, but that's the way it's headed. And I don't know the year. I mean, we can offer different years and have plans to get there. But in general, nobody's really building new coal plants today simply because it's more expensive to produce energy that way. And if that changes, that changes. But I think for now, most of the new capacity is solar and wind. And then, yes, with solar and wind, you have the question of load balancing. How do you address it during the night when you don't have solar, or when it's not windy? Although they're citing many of the wind farms in areas that have 300 days or so of wind. So that's where natural gas and then battery storage comes in. It has been more natural gas. I think over time, as efficiency of the batteries and storage increases, there'll be more on that side as well, where there'll be more battery and storage as well as other forms of load balancing. So, again, it's where we're headed. It's a debate. You're right. Somebody could say, no, it'll be 2055 or 2040, or I like to be optimistic, and I do think it's a good thing, and I do believe in cleaner air, and so, I like to be optimistic about the date. But, certainly anybody could be off who's projecting, because it also relies on future technology advances in solar and wind and in storage. And, nothing crazy. We're just saying we think technology will continue to increase at the same rate it's been increasing the last decade, last 2 decades. We expect that to just continue. If there's some huge breakthrough, it could happen even sooner. We could both be wrong. It could be 2025 because nobody can make money from coal because somebody has some huge breakthrough in solar and wind. But assuming it's about the same level of improvement, somewhere in that 2040 or 2050 time frame, I think that's when that transition will occur. It's an honor to